Good morning. Welcome back to Mesot, Thailand. It is Wednesday, September 16th, and I guess I have a little bit of a story to tell. Originally, I wasn't going to tell this story. It's something I would normally write down in a journal entry or write in an email to a friend of mine. But I started thinking about it, and it seemed like kind of a funny story, and maybe the kind of thing that always seems to happen to me and not to other people. So here's my story. As I'm sure you guessed already, the story is about my visa status here in Thailand, and that's an ongoing drama for all foreigners here in Thailand, especially those on an expired tourist visa like me. In an unusual twist, the Thailand Immigration Bureau made an announcement that foreigners like me on an expired tourist visa, we would be able to apply for a 30-day extension, but only if we got a visa extension support letter from our embassy. So if you are from Australia, you had to get this letter from the Australian embassy. If you were American, you had to get it from the US embassy. And in my case, I had to get this letter from the Canadian embassy. I sent an email to the Canadian embassy asking them if I could get this visa extension support letter. And I got a lengthy and very nice and very informative reply. But the upshot was no. The Canadian embassy was not giving out these support letters. And that was pretty much the end of it. And I started looking into flights out of Thailand. I was looking into flights to back to Canada, of course, because that's where I'm from. And I was looking into flights to anywhere, basically. And the best option outside of Canada seemed to be Turkey. And I got very, very close in my flight research to booking one of these flights. I had my finger on my phone kind of hovering over the, buy now, book now button. I got that close to it. But then I thought, let's ask the embassy one more time. And I decided to do that because other embassies had changed their policies. The American embassy, for example, I believe they originally said they were not going to give out these support letters. But then they changed their mind and they suddenly started giving them to anybody who asked for them. Any American citizen could just click on the link online, fill in the information, name and passport number, and then they would get one of these support letters by email. And that would allow them to get a 30-day extension in Thailand, or possibly get one. The final decision was still up to Thailand immigration, of course, but without this letter, you couldn't even apply. If you had no letter from your embassy, they won't even accept your application. So it was absolutely necessary. So while I was trying to book a flight out of Thailand, I started to wonder that if the American embassy had changed its policy and was now... Now there's a little guy. Oddly enough, he wasn't attacking me this time. He let me go by, and then he got upset with this woman ahead of me. Still made me jump, though. That was a pretty loud and savage snarl coming out of such a small dog. Anyway, since the American embassy had changed its policy, I thought maybe the Canadian embassy was going to as well. So I sent them another email and introduced myself again and asked them, is the Canadian embassy thinking about changing its policy and perhaps issuing these letters to Canadian citizens? And they said, no, we have not changed our policy. Canadians are not going to be issued this letter, and we don't anticipate changing this policy. So that was at the end of it, and I went back to, looking at flights out of Thailand. And then I got a second email from them, kind of a follow-up email, that asked me for some information about me, and it was kind of hinting that they might make an exception in my case and issue me one of these visa extension support letters. But I had to supply them with certain information. And this is where the drama of my most recent story begins. I don't know where I am, by the way. I just turned down a side street here in Mesot, and oh man, uh-oh. Got some dogs here who don't really like me that much. Guard dogs, I guess. Oop. And cars coming down the road. But at least they're behind a fence and a gate here, and they can't get at me. So yeah, I'm just walking around Mesot, down some new streets into some new neighborhoods. And of course, one of the first things I ran into was the canal system. Just saw this little alleyway leading to the canal system. There it is over there. Oh, I thought maybe I could walk along the canal, but for whatever reason, it is blocked on both sides. Big fence. Looks like an informal fence. You know, that wasn't put there by the city government, I don't think. It's probably these people that did it. And then someone did the same thing on this end. And they're quite serious about it. They don't want you crawling around. They even put these giant pointy things around the edges to make it difficult to climb around. Yeah, that's where the canal walkway goes, but they don't want you going over there. I probably walked along this section of the canal before, but I'm not sure. So the issue with the Canadian Embassy and the support letter for me was my residency status. I told them in my email that I didn't have a home in Canada. I had no house, I had no apartment. So returning to Canada presented some difficulties, you know, because I had nowhere to go, nowhere to live. And when you go back to Canada, you're expected to go into 2 weeks quarantine. You have to submit a plan in advance, you know, with the address of where you're going to be for those 2 weeks. And you have to have enough food and medicine and water and these things in stock, you know, to support yourself. And I explained I have nowhere to go and nowhere really to go into quarantine. I have friends and family that I can hit up, but it would cause some hardship for all of them. Some of my friends, for their work, they're not allowed to have any contact with anyone who has arrived from overseas. And in terms of relatives, most of them have, you know, young children or newborns, you know, children going back to school, or they have contact with children going back to school. And I didn't want to put them in the position of worrying about me coming from overseas and being in their house. So I'm explaining this to the Canadian Embassy, basically saying that I left Canada about 25 years ago, and I haven't maintained a residence in Canada ever since. And in fact, the last time I was physically in Canada was a visit about 11 years ago. So I guess someone at the embassy mulled this over, and they thought, you know, maybe we can help this guy out. And they asked me for proof that I do not reside in Canada. And that originally kind of stumped me because it's proving a negative, like prove you don't live in Canada. And I was thinking, how do I prove I don't have a house there? One can prove that you do have a house by showing a lease or a deed or something like that. But how do you prove you do not own a house? It's kind of a funny thing. But the embassy made a suggestion and said, can you provide copies of visas of all the countries you've been in for the last, you know, X number of years to show that you do not reside in Canada? And I thought, actually, I can only go back 5 years because that's all my current passport shows, but I can do that. So we seem to be making some progress. Here's the canal where it intersects with the road, and now I remember this. I actually walked along this section of the canal before, But I think I'm just going to do it again, just for fun. Since I'm here, just walk along this sidewalk, go down there, turn around, and come back again. At least it's nice and quiet. The only barrier is getting up this giant step. Oh yeah, this is where they have the cement manufacturing places. They make cement pipes, drainage pipes, and things like that. When I come back, I should probably walk along there just to see what's going on. Here are some of the things that they make here. All of them made by hand. These weren't here the last time I walked along this canal, so I guess these were all made since the last time I was here. Anyway, with modern technology, this seemed like an easy thing to do. So I got out my passport and went from page to page to page and took pictures of all the visas for the past 5 years, which I have spent here in Southeast Asia. I assembled all of these pictures, wrote out a short email to the Canadian Embassy, attached these 14 pictures to the email, hit send, and I thought, wow, this is going along swimmingly. Very unusual for me. But then my karma kind of kicked in, and I got an email error message from Microsoft saying that this email was not sent to anybody because you exceeded the allowed number of attachments. You're only allowed to attach 10 items, and I had attached 14. So I got an error message. The email bounced back to me. So I thought, okay, I'll have to send them in batches of 2. And I resent the email with 10 images attached and thought, okay, I sent 10. Now I'll send a second email with 4 and we're all done. Now I'm busy working on the second email with 4 attachments. And then I get another error message. The email with the 10 bounced back. Got another email from Microsoft that said, this email has not been delivered to anyone. That was the phrasing in their email, because you exceeded the size limits for attachments. So my 10 pictures were too big to be sent by email. Okay, so now we have to somehow reduce the size of these images. And I should point out that I was under a bit of a time pressure here. This was on a Thursday, September 24th or September 26th, when I have to leave the country. That date was really getting close, so I had to book a flight as soon as possible. So I had to get this visa situation settled fast. You know, I was feeling a little bit of stress about this. And since it was Thursday and a weekend was creeping up, I thought, yeah, if I send this email to the Canadian Embassy Thursday morning and I get a reply perhaps by Thursday afternoon or Friday, then I can take that letter, go to immigration, and start the process of getting a 30-day extension. If I miss Thursday or Friday, now we've got the whole weekend is going to pass by. I'll probably hear from them on Monday, won't be able to do anything until Tuesday, and then things were starting to get really tight. So I was feeling, as I was working on this email, some time pressure, and I was trying to get this email sent as soon as possible. That was my goal anyway. What I had to do was make these pictures of my passport pages smaller, but I had no program on my phone that was capable of doing that. I could do it on a laptop pretty easily, but I don't have a laptop at the moment. And I had no program on my phone to do it, and I couldn't find one online that I could download. So I went looking for an online program. I know there's quite a few free, websites online that does this for you. And after a little bit of searching and digging around, I found one that seemed like it would work for me. So one by one by one, I had to take these 14 images from my phone, upload it to this website, make all the selections to convert that picture to the smallest file size possible, to compress it, to make the file size tiny, as small as it can possibly be. They had an option for that. Then the website would, kerchunk, 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 process. And when it was done, I could then download the reduced file back down to my phone. I did this one by one by one. It was a long process for all 14 images. And to be honest, they didn't get as small as I wanted them to. They were still about 1.5 megabytes in size. And that was, I could email those, but they still seemed pretty big to me. And I was pretty sure it's possible to make these files smaller. But this program couldn't do it for some reason. But I went through the whole process, downloaded all 14, and then I recreated my reply to the Canadian Embassy, attached 10 of these pictures, sent it in, and I started working on, the second email. So there I am thinking, all right, I'm making progress. And then I get an error message from Microsoft again saying this email was not delivered to anyone because your email exceeded the attachment size limit. And by this point, I'm like pulling out my hair because I don't know what they're talking about. The size limit was 20 megabytes. My 10 pictures was 15 megabytes, 5 megabytes below the limit, but Microsoft still rejected it and said, this email can't be delivered. After much research and gnashing of teeth, I finally figured out what the problem was. And the problem was that I was replying inside an email chain. So all the previous emails I had tried to send, plus all the Microsoft replies, which were quite big and long, saying that this email was too big, were still in that email chain. And when I put my new email at the end, I think I'm just replying and sending one email. It seems that I was actually trying to resend the contents of that entire email chain, including all the previous attempts with the other attachments. So no matter what I did, no matter how many times I tried, this email would not go through. So yeah, I'm just like going crazy, like my heart is starting to pound, my fingers are trembling, and it's not easy for me to do these things on a phone because I don't have very good finger pressure for swiping. Every time I try to swipe, I accidentally click on things and make mistakes, and time was passing and I'm feeling more and more stress. And in the end, I've decided that the only thing I can do is send a brand new email. Like instead of replying to the email from the Canadian Embassy, I would have to send them a brand new, fresh one. Attach 10 of these pictures amounting to 15 megabytes under the limit, and then send them that email. I was worried about that because how would anyone at the embassy know what this email was in reference to? When you send a reply, it's pretty easy. The embassy asked me for copies of these visas in an email. I replied to that email with the copies, and it would automatically go to the right person, and they would know what these pictures were all about. But if I send the Canadian Embassy a brand new email just out of the blue with 10 pictures on it, who knows who it even goes to? None of the emails from the embassy had the name of a person or a department or anything like that attached. I didn't know who I was communicating with. So I would have to come up with some kind of a subject line or explanation in the email, telling them all about me and why I'm sending this email full of pictures and what it's related to, and then just kind of hope that they knew what I was talking about and would send it to the right person. So I really didn't want to send a brand new email. I didn't have any confidence that it would actually arrive anywhere useful. But it was my only option as far as I could tell. So I do all this. I put together a brand new email, attach 10 pictures. I send it in. I start working on the second one. Whoops. I thought it was a dog. It was a chicken. Now I'm scared of chickens. I don't know. Mesot is turning me into a nervous walker. So I send this email. I start working on the second one. And of course, I get another error email from Microsoft that says this email was not sent to anyone because it exceeds the attachment limits. And I'm telling you, it did not exceed the attachment limits. It was 15 megabytes, and they told me in the email the limit was 20 megabytes. So I don't know why it kept going wrong, but it would not go through. So I didn't want to do it, but I had no choice but to try to make these pictures even smaller. And I went back to the website and I uploaded the compressed versions of these emails and tried to recompress them to make them even smaller, but that wouldn't work. I guess with compression, you reach a limit. The limit for these images was 1.5 megabytes each, and they could not be compressed any farther than that. But then I had a brainstorm that, okay, compression is one thing, but you can also change the pixel dimensions. These images out of my phone had quite large dimensions, much larger than they needed to be, something like 6,000 by 4,000 pixels. And on this website, you could compress the image, but you could also change the pixel dimensions. So I chose, like 640 by 480 as the new dimensions, and finally, hallelujah, these pictures were now like 100 kilobytes each, which is normal. I mean, you can still read everything clearly at 100 kilobytes at 640 by 480. You don't need such big file sizes for a simple picture of a visa. So now I had to go through the long process of, for all 14 images, changing the pixel dimensions, like uploading them again, changing the pixel dimensions, downloading them again, trying to keep them all organized in different folders so they don't get mixed up and I don't, forget one, something like that. And after a long time, I finally had 14 images of my visas from my passport, and all of the files were like 100 kilobytes each. So there is no way this would exceed the attachment limits for Microsoft. Rebuilt the email, attached these new small files, tried to send them, error message, your attachments are too large, and this email was not sent to anyone. And this made no sense at all. By this time, 2.5, 3 hours had passed as I'd been working on this. An entire day essentially had gone by, and I still had not managed to even send one simple email. And this was not boding well for my attempts to get a 30-day visa extension. I'm back at the road where I started my walk along the canal, and now that I'm here, I don't think I've ever gone in that direction, or have I? I'm not sure. I know I looked at Google Maps, and if you follow the river this way, the canal, you eventually end up right behind Borderline Restaurant, which is over there somewhere. I'm going to walk along here just a little ways and see where it goes. Another quick hop to get up, and here we are. I may have walked along that side, I'm not sure. Oh, it gets a little bit jungly over there. Well, let's see how far I can make it. As I said, I'm not going anywhere in particular on this walk, so it doesn't matter if I end up turning around and backtracking. With no success sending any of these emails to the Canadian Embassy, I tried one other thing. I went back to the original email chain, which was many, many, many emails long, and I wondered whether I could delete just sections of that email chain. I hadn't tried this before because the delete button, I thought, would delete the whole email chain, even going back to the original email, and I didn't want to lose that. So I didn't dare click on the delete button. But at this point, I figured I didn't have much to lose, so I went to the very last email in the email chain, which was the error message from Microsoft again. And I clicked on the delete button, and to my delight, only the Microsoft reply disappeared. So apparently you can go into a reply chain and just slowly delete all of the emails and all of the replies until you get all the way back to the original email, which I did. Then I attached 10 of my small files, the 100 kilobyte, copies of my pictures, hit the send button, made a cup of coffee in my room, and I waited with bated breath, and I never got an error message. And then I checked my sent emails folder, and there it was. After 3.5 hours of hard work, I had finally managed to send one email back to the Canadian Embassy. I was so relieved. And then I put together the second email with the 4 extra, pictures, sent that in, and it also seemed to go through. By this point, I didn't have a lot of confidence in the system. There was no way that I could know that it really did go to the Canadian Embassy. They didn't have an automated system, where they sent a reply saying, "We received your email," because this was a reply to an email. I just had to hope that it went through and that someone at the Canadian Embassy now had copies of all of my visas showing that I had been in Southeast Asia for the last many, many numbers of years. Ooh, we're really going through a jungle here. Here we are. It's opening up a little bit over here. Yes, this feels brand new, actually. I think I have walked on the other side, and that's where I was attacked by some dogs. Probably the most dangerous dog attack I've experienced here was around the corner here, but at least it was on the other side. I think I'm safe on this side. And there seems to be another canal just over here. Interesting. Or was that? No, that's just where I came from. That's where I was over there. That's where the cement works are. And then I walked down here and made a complete U-turn and started back this way. Okay. So that was confusing. Let's see if we can get to a borderline cafe this way. Originally, I'd hoped I could send the Canadian Embassy this email like first thing Thursday morning. I got their email at like 10:30. I wanted to reply by 11 before they went to lunch, and then perhaps they could send me my approval letter by Thursday afternoon, and then I could go to immigration on Friday. But it had taken me all of Thursday to send this one email, so I knew that that was a forlorn hope. And in fact, I did not get a reply on Thursday, but I was quite happy when on Friday I did get a reply from the Canadian Embassy, and they said that they had looked at, the documents I had sent them, and they were going to issue me, as an exception, a visa extension support letter, and I would get this letter by email on Monday morning. So I was making progress with my application for a visa extension, but I'm not making progress in terms of the canal. I ran into another wall, and nobody is getting past this one very easily. You would have to be a very determined person. This is like Mad Max of the Mesot canals territory. And that's where it continues, but it looks like there are more walls over there, and we have no choice but to turn around. Actually, I don't really have to go all the way around. I can cut through here and then get back to that road where I was on. There's a little bit of a trail here. As everyone tells me, I should be careful and keep an eye out for snakes, but I think we'll be okay. Going through the tall grass. You see fields like this quite often with these nets for the the games that they play here in Thailand. generally involve kicking the ball over the net with your feet rather than hands. It's not like North American volleyball. This is an entirely different game. I can't think of the name right now, but that's what they would play here. Time for a quick Google Maps check and see whether I want to go straight or head off in that direction. I can go in either direction, but I think I'm going to turn left down this small road because I think if I go through here and do a little dipsy-doodle through a couple of streets, I could end up right behind Borderline. There's no reason to go there. I'm just curious what it looks like. So let's head in this direction. Monday morning, I got the email from the Canadian Embassy as they promised, and I got the visa extension support letter. These letters are really quite amusing, and I don't understand the system in any way because when you think through the logic of it, it's almost as if the government of Thailand is giving up their own sovereignty in terms of deciding who can be in their country and who can't. They essentially said to all the foreigners like me, you Canadians, you can stay in Thailand if the Canadian Embassy lets you stay. The Americans, you can stay if the American Embassy lets you stay. If they will give you a letter, you can stay. If you don't get a letter, you can't. And it's your embassy that makes the decision about whether, you get this letter or not. Oh, this guy came running out of nowhere, being chased by a friend. Another big guy over there. I've never really been nervous about dogs before. Even when I've been cycling, they never really worried me that much. But here I keep getting startled so often. And when you read these letters from the embassies, they don't say anything at all. The letter essentially says that the bearer of this letter is a Canadian citizen with this passport number. And then it says, we at the Canadian Embassy have no objection to this foreigner staying in Thailand. That's all it says. Those are the key words. We do not object to this Canadian citizen being in Thailand. That's all. And then you bring that letter to the Immigration Bureau of Thailand and apply for your 30-day extension. Look at this pack. They seem to be stray dogs, but they're also quite healthy looking. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. They're big dogs. I wonder if they're all part of the same family. So, yeah, they're keeping a close eye on me. Once I got the email on Monday, I copied it to a flash drive along with a whole bunch of other documents, and then I went to the local shop in my neighborhood to make all the photocopies and printouts and everything like that I felt I would need at immigration. And I basically copy everything I can think of because you never know what you're going to need. And I make multiple copies of everything because you never know how many copies they're going to want. You can never have too many photocopies when you go to an immigration office. That's my rule of thumb. This turned out to be the wrong street. I have to backtrack and I have to go by the wild pack one more time. Luckily, they seem pretty nervous about me, so there they are. The one wrinkle in my package of documents for immigration, at least the one wrinkle that I was anticipating, was the last time I went to immigration in Thailand to get an extension, they wanted to see a receipt from my hotel or guest house. This took me by surprise the first time this happened, and that was when I was staying at the first hotel. And I had to leave immigration, come back into Mesot, go to the first hotel and try to explain to them that I needed some kind of a receipt, which caused some confusion because these budget hotels don't give receipts. You pay in cash you know, a week at a time or daily, whatever your arrangement is. And then they say, thank you very much, and you go on about your life. Nobody's filling out receipts and dating them and signing them. So I went back to First Hotel and said, can you give me a receipt? And they had no idea what I was talking about. But I eventually managed to snag something off their desk that was, in fact, a blank receipt. It looked official. It didn't have anything on it. Like, it wasn't an actual receipt for me. But I took this blank and I put my name on it. And then I used that as, you know, the document to give to immigration. And it worked out absolutely fine. They're not that crazy serious about how official this has to be. They just need a piece of paper that looks official, that has the name and address of the hotel where you're staying. So before I went to immigration on Monday, I tracked down the owner and manager of my guest house to ask her for something like this. And we ran into a problem. The biggest problem was she just couldn't understand me. Her English is not that good. She can speak some, but when it gets down to the practical little details, she, more dogs. That one took me by surprise too. And I talked to her for a long, long time, trying to explain, like, do you have like a name card, a business card, a piece of paper, anything? And she started telling me about how when I first moved in, I had signed a contract for 3 months, and that 3 months had expired, so she could not give me a copy of that because it was not valid anymore. In order for her to give me something, I would have to sign a new contract, and since I had not paid for 3 months in advance, she could not provide me with any of this paperwork. And we stood there talking for the longest time, and she stood at the foot of the stairs to her office and home and was clearly not going to budge. No matter how long I tried to explain that this was not a serious thing, I just need some piece of paper with the name of your guest house on it that I can give to immigration. And she was not going to budge, and she refused to give me anything. And I was getting a little bit annoyed, a little bit irritated, and I could feel myself getting upset. So I finally just said, okay, all right, thank you very much. I'll just go. I'll go to immigration and see what happens. A funny thing is that when I have paid at the guest house, I pay month by month. The owner does give me kind of a receipt. It's not really a receipt. She actually gives me a bill, and she writes it by hand on a little scrap of paper. She just tears it off of a piece of paper from a photocopier or something, some old document. She tears off a corner, writes down a bunch of numbers each month and says, okay, this is what you owe. And that is what I pay her. And that piece of paper is my only indication that I've paid anything to this guest house. But that was all I had. And I had a whole stack of those, one for every month. And I brought those with me, wondering if perhaps that would be good enough for immigration. They wanted a receipt from the guest house, and technically these were my receipts. That's all I have, and that's all they're giving me, so I had no choice. So, after all of this, it's finally time to head to immigration. It's about 7 kilometers away, the office, from downtown Mesot. And when I went out there before, I would leave from the First Hotel because it's a well-known hotel. Taxi drivers know how to get there. And at the desk, they have name cards from various taxi companies. And I had had success in the past at the First Hotel, calling one of those numbers. Actually, the guys at the First Hotel, they would do it for me. And the taxi would come, pick me up, and we'd go to immigration. So instead of calling for a taxi from my guest house, I walked over to the First Hotel, and I got the phone number of this taxi company. And I decided to take a taxi, by the way, simply because it's very, very comfortable, but it also costs about the same as a motorcycle taxi. You can go out on the streets and just wave down some guy on a motorcycle and he will drive you, but the taxi costs pretty much the same in my experience, so I didn't see any point to doing that. So I went to the first hotel, grabbed the number there, and I called the taxi company myself. I was very proud of myself that I did it, and I didn't ask the guys to do it for me. And I spoke to this woman and said, you know, in very basic English, taxi, first hotel, immigration, just the key words. And she understood instantly what I needed and dispatched a taxi to come to the first hotel. So I'm sitting there waiting. Finally, after all this effort, I'm going to immigration. And then as I'm sitting there waiting for the taxi, I realized that in all the excitement, I had completely forgotten to bring any photographs. And you're going to need at least 2 photographs for any kind of application. And they were sitting in this document pouch I have back at my guest house room, and I had forgotten to bring it with me. So there I was, so happy to have this taxi coming to get me, and now I couldn't really go. I had to go back and get the photos. So there's nothing I could do. I called the woman back and said, cancel, cancel, taxi. And then I had to go back to the guest house and pick up this pouch with documents and all my photographs in it. Then I had to walk back to the first hotel to call the taxi company again. And of course, this time when I'm actually ready to go, for whatever reason, my call wouldn't go through. I would dial and dial and dial the number on my phone. It worked perfectly 2 times just before. And now, for some reason, I just got an error message and the call wouldn't go through. And of course, the error message was in Thai. So I have no idea what the voice was telling me, what the problem was. So I couldn't even fix the problem. So now I had to track down one of the guys from the first hotel and ask him, could you call a taxi for me? He did. The taxi came, picked me up, and off we went to immigration. We had to pass through a military checkpoint because the immigration office is right on the border with Myanmar. And they're very, very nervous right now about people crossing the border in and out of Myanmar. So there's a military checkpoint there. Taxi driver, of course, is quite laid back. He's used to these things. A soldier came up to the window. He rolled down the window, kind of pointed his thumb at me in the back seat. Yeah, I got a white dude going to immigration, And so the soldier says, okay, white dude going to immigration? Yeah, go ahead. And, they waved us through the military checkpoint. And finally, I was on my way to immigration. I think this is a new section of the canal for me as well. And there is a door here, but someone has opened it. So I'm going to walk on through, see where I end up. After all this time and complications, I was finally at immigration, and believe it or not, it was when I got to immigration that things finally started to get complicated. Yes, it got much more complicated. Oh, what's happening here? Running into a street. Canal crosses the street. Oh, it looks like it's a very simple process to cross over and go down the other side. So this is quite nice. Oh, I have no idea where I am. The first problem was something I haven't mentioned yet, is that in the last couple of months, I also had to get a new passport because my old passport was full. So I had gone through this long process with the Canadian Embassy where I had gotten a new passport. And my original Thai visa and visa extension, those stamps, were in my old passport, which technically was now expired and useless. And apparently my pathway is also useless. And there's quite the barrier. If I really wanted to, I suppose I could fight my way through there, like create a tunnel through the undergrowth. But I think I'm going to try to go over onto the other side and see if I can go that way. So, time to backtrack. One reason I don't want to try to go through here is I do see a lot of bees on these flowers, and I don't know, getting stung by bees, bitten by snakes in there. I'm not quite sure what's happening. So we're going to turn around and backtrack here a little bit. So what I had to do at immigration was a two-stage process. First, I had to get all of my records and visa stamps transferred from my old passport to my new one. And once that was done, then I could apply for my 30-day COVID-19 visa extension. But I wasn't sure how to do that or how to explain it to people, because as amazing as the women at Mesot immigration are, and I can't stress that enough, the people that I dealt with there were amazing. They worked so hard, and they went above and beyond the call of duty to help me every time I've been there. So I can't say enough good things about Mesot immigration. But that's not to say everything went smoothly. You're still dealing with a very large and unwieldy bureaucracy, right? So I get there and I'm speaking to this woman, trying to. She doesn't really understand me. We've got this big plastic barrier between us because of all the new coronavirus, precautions and restrictions. So our voice doesn't really carry through. And when she speaks English, I can't really make out what she's saying. Almost everyone there speaks some English, but my ears are not skilled enough to figure out what it is they're saying. So I basically did my best to explain what I needed, and I handed over my 2 passports, plus all my photocopies, and on top of it all was my COVID-19 letter from the embassy. And I thought that letter would make it clear that what I'm here to do is get my 30-day extension. Here's the letter for that. But in order to do that, we have to transfer things over to my new passport. And I thought that might be clear through what I said and through the paperwork. And I handed everything across, and she seemed to know. She seemed kind of indicated, oh yeah, I got this under control. But then, this is after I'd kind of waited in line, to get to the front of the line. And then she said, she handed me back my passports and said, my old passport, I have to get photocopies of every single page of my old passport as part of my application package to do the transfer. I was like, oh, okay. I talked to a lot of people about transferring records to a new passport, and everyone said it was no problem. You just bring in your 2 passports and they do it for you. No one had mentioned I needed a copy of every single page from my passport. And it was a bit ironic that I had spent so many hours taking photographs of all the pages of that passport and then trying to email them to the embassy. So I was very familiar with those pages, and I had millions of copies on my phone in the form of pictures, but of course they needed photocopies. So I'd left immigration, went out into the area around Mesot immigration, which, as I said, is right at the Friendship Bridge on the border. Just like a ghost town. It's so sad there to see because there are so many businesses there that are shuttered and shut down. And normally, because of the cross-border traffic, that area is just bustling. It's like a beehive of activity. But nothing going on now, because that border crossing is closed. But I found a place that could make all these copies for me. They had one of those 300-year-old photocopy machines that barely had any toner left in it. But they went through every single page of my passport and made copies. And they're very faint. You could barely make them out. But they could be read, and I thought they would be good enough for immigration. So I got all those copies organized, and then I went back to immigration, stood in line, waited for the line to move forward so I could get to the window again. Handed in my stack of copies from my passport. The woman looked at them and said, oh, you have to sign every page. So, of course, I'm thinking, yeah, couldn't you have told me that before? I mean, could that not have been a package deal in terms of information? You have to get copies of every page and you have to sign every page and then come back. But I guess you get the information little bits at a time. So I had to leave the line again, go out to a counter somewhere, and then, sign every single page that I had made copies of. Whoa. Yeah, I don't think I would have gotten very far on the other side. Check this out. There's a real jungle on that side. I'm not sure if there's a tunnel through that or not. But on this side, it's quite open, which is nice. So I went off and I signed every page, and then I got back in line again and had to wait for my turn back up at the window. And I hand everything in, my 2 passports, all of my copies, everything signed. And then the woman took control. She clearly knew what she was doing. She was quite the expert, was busy there stamping, 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 pasting, stamping, more pasting, clipping, stapling, stamping, stamping. A lot of activity, a lot of stuff on the computer as well. And then she finally finished all of that, called me back to the window, handed me my 2 passports and said, there you are, you're all done. You know, see you next time, with a big smile. And it turns out that all she had done was transfer the records from my old passport to the new passport. Everything I'd said about the 30-day extension and everything to do with the embassy letter, all of that had just gone right over her head. She had no idea I was there to do that. All she had done was go from passport to passport. So now I had to take a deep breath and say, yeah, about that. I'd also like to apply for the 30-day visa extension. And she looked at me and said, oh, you can't do that because you have to have an embassy letter. And of course I said, I gave you an embassy letter. She said, no, you didn't. Where is your embassy letter? And I said, I gave you. That was part of everything I gave you. You already have my embassy letter. And she says, no, I don't. And we went around for a little while. And finally, she went over to the folder or wherever it was, all of my huge stack of documents had ended up, rifled through them. And she says, oh, that's an embassy letter. And she pulled it out, and she hadn't even noticed what it was. She just added it to my stack of documents. So now we had to start a whole new process all over again. The starting point for this new process, the 30-day extension, was making sure that I had all the right copies and documents that they're going to require. The embassy letter is the most important one. I had that. I had it all along, but she didn't know that. So we had that letter, and then there's a whole bunch of forms I had to fill out. The TM7, which is the main form, and that one is always a bit of a challenge because it is written in Thai and English, but when you see the written words about what you have to write down in what blank, it's never clear to me which words apply to which blank. I find that form incredibly confusing, and I can never figure it out. And even when I can figure out where I'm supposed to write things down, I don't know what they're asking for. The English often doesn't make any sense to me. And in the end, the woman, the clerk, basically has to babysit me and walk me through the entire form and tell me line by line by line what it is I have to fill out. Because I don't know if I'm alone in this, you know, as a foreigner here in Thailand, but I can't figure out any of the forms here. I always need help filling them out. And this TM7, oddly enough, you get 2 copies of. I mean, everything you give them, you have to give them 2 photocopies, not just 1. It's always 2 copies of your departure card, 2 copies of your passport, 2 copies of everything. And when it comes to the TM7, they give you 2 blank copies, but instead of filling one out and then making a copy of it, you have to fill out both of them by hand. And I'm a very poor writer. I'm a very slow writer, and this takes me forever to fill out one form and finding my address in Thailand and my phone number in Thailand and the issue date for my passport and the expiry date and all the information you need to fill out. It takes a long time, and then after I finish the form, I'm thinking, finally, finished TM7. And then they come over, here's another copy, Phil, you have to do 2 copies of TM7. So I have to rewrite everything down a second time in a whole new blank copy of the TM7. And there are some other forms. There's one that says I understand that there are overstay penalties. There's other forms that are all in Thai with a little bit of English, and they tell me, don't worry about the Thai, just sign at the bottom. I have no idea what I'm signing. I just sign everything that they put in front of me. And beforehand, I thought I had been very clever because when I was making photocopies of my passport, there's a ton of room left over on the page. So I put my departure card at the bottom and photocopied the two of them at the same time. But it turns out that's not acceptable either. So they would ask me, oh, where are your copies of your departure card? And I'm saying, they're right there. You know, my photocopy of the passport, that's my departure card. I copied it on the same page. But no, you can't do that. You have to have a copy of your departure card on a whole separate copy. So I had to leave immigration, go back to the copy place and make all these extra copies of everything to make sure that everything is on an individual page. And I thought I was being very clever this time because I know they want me to sign every page. So at the bottom of every page, before I handed it to them, I signed my name. Very proud of myself for that. But then once they took all the papers from me, they took out this giant stamp, a big rectangular stamp, and stamped the bottom of every photocopy. Stamp, 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 stamp. And it turns out I'm supposed to sign my name inside that square. And if my signature, where I had written it previously, happened to fall into that square, that's great. But if it didn't, then I had to re-sign every single form and sign inside that square. But even that was confusing because every time they handed me one of these forms, they would say to me, write your full name. Every time they would say, okay, here, write your full name, write your full name. But on the form itself, it always says signature. So I'm not sure what I'm supposed to do. Am I supposed to am I supposed to give them a signature or write my name, print it out? And I never got an answer from anyone there, so I ended up doing both. I would write my name in full, and then underneath that I would give them my signature, which of course takes twice as long. And the way these things work, they never want the original of anything. What they want are photocopies. So you have the original, you make 2 photocopies, you give them the 2 photocopies, they give you back the original, and then they bring you another form that's you have to fill out and sign, which is a declaration that you showed them the original. So for every copy I gave them, they handed me another form that said at some point I had shown them the original of that photocopy. So every single piece of paper I handed to them, they gave me one back, and then I gave them a piece of paper, they gave me another. There didn't seem to be any end to this paper chain we were going through. But we fought our way through all of that. And then they turned to me and said, oh, do you have a receipt from your guest house? And I had been waiting for that. I was kind of dreading it. And I said, I do have receipts in a way. And I brought out the big stack of little scraps of paper with all the amounts that I had paid the guest house month by month. And I even had a picture of the guest house on my phone. I showed them the photograph of the guest house. This is where I'm staying. And here are all my receipts for my payments to this guest house. And of course, they looked at me like I was completely out of my mind. Like, we can't accept these. And they showed me other people's application packages that had beautiful receipts from the various hotels that they're staying at, complete with the name and address and signatures and dates and all this kind of stuff. This is what we need. We can't accept that. And I explained to them, or I tried to explain, that I tried so hard to get this receipt from the owner of my guest house, but they just would not give it to me. They would not provide me with any paperwork at all. And this is where the people at immigration, again, went above and beyond the call of duty, because they said, do you have their phone number? And I said I did, and I gave them the phone number. And they called the owner of my guest house, spoke to her on the phone, and explained to her that, this is immigration. We have one of your guests here applying for a visa extension, and could you give him an official piece of paper with the name of your guest house on it? We cannot process his application without it. So after all of this effort of getting to immigration and doing all of this, getting the embassy letter, now I had to turn around and go all the way back into Mesot, go back to my guest house, and talk again to the owner of my guest house and see if she can give me this piece of paper that immigration had told her about. I took a taxi from, a motorcycle taxi from immigration back downtown, and that was not without its humor. I remember I just told them to take me to the first hotel because that is the more well-known address. They wouldn't know my guest house, I don't think. And the guy dropped me off there, and I'm about to walk away after paying him, and he gives me kind of a salute. And I thought, that's weird. Nobody here ever salutes me. So I thought, I don't know the customs. I guess I'll salute him back. And I saluted him, and I started to walk away. But then he shouted at me, and he made that gesture again. And he wasn't saluting me. He was pointing at his helmet, because I was still wearing the helmet that he had given me to wear. It was his helmet, and he wanted me to give it back, and I had forgotten to take it off. So that was kind of funny. I've reached an interesting part of the canal. I haven't seen anything quite like this elsewhere. There's a large metal bridge across the canal, and I'm not quite sure what this place is that is over here, but it's something important. And there's another place over here. On my map, it says Community Center, but I don't know what that is. But they have some very clear instructions about COVID-19. Here's their illustration of the COVID-19 virus. I guess he's not allowed. He's been no COVID-19 allowed here. And apparently these are the rules, the mask, the hand washing. I'm not sure what that is. You should exercise. A lot of information. And apparently there are 7 steps to washing your hands properly. I guess you have to wash them pretty much like a surgeon would do it. 1, 2, 3, there. Oh, the number 5 would be your thumbs. I guess your thumbs get an individual washing. The palms of your hands kind of get a tickling, and then your wrists get rubbing as well. So yeah, very thorough hand washing. And I was walking on that side, but there's kind of a tent structure over there that I can't get through. So now I'm crossing over to this side and continuing along. Based on what the immigration official told me, I expected the owner of my guest house to be waiting with an official receipt, just standing there and just handing it to me. Here you go. But when I got back to my guest house, it turns out something got lost in the translation because she was still very unclear about what to do. And we stood there for a long time discussing this, what she was supposed to give me and what I needed. And I gave her a copy of the hotel receipt from the first hotel that I had earlier, and I just showed her. I don't know why I have to show the owner of a guest house that's been operating probably for 20 years what a receipt looks like, but I guess I had to, and I showed her this receipt and said, this is a receipt from a hotel. It's pretty simple. Name of your hotel at the top, address, phone number, the name, a little blank for the name of the guest. That's all I need, something like that. So she took that receipt from me, and she took out a blank piece of 8.5 by 11 inch paper and said, is it okay if by hand she writes out everything that's on this other receipt from the first hotel and just copies it by hand onto this piece of paper? And I had to just laugh and say, I mean, you can do that if you want, but I don't think that's going to help me out. There must be something here with the name of the hotel on it, something official. She finally went rummaging around, I guess, inside and came out with a very official looking piece of paper that said receipt at the top and had the name and address of the guest house on it. And I thought, yes, that's exactly what I've been looking for all this time. That's what I need, just that. I don't know why this is so complicated. And she gave me this, then I wrote my name onto it where it said guest name or something like that. And I said, this will be absolutely fine. Thank you very much. And I went into my room at the guest house because it was lunchtime by now. The immigration office was closed for a couple hours, and I wouldn't be able to do anything even if I went back there. So I went into my room, had a cup of coffee, took a shower to cool down, turned on the air conditioner, because I had another project. While I was at immigration, they gave me another form, and they explained that on this form, I had to draw by hand, a map of Mesot showing the location of my guest house. And I guess this is a new piece of the puzzle that has been put in place since the coronavirus pandemic, that when you apply for a visa extension, you now have to, from memory, you're not allowed to copy anything from Google Maps. From memory, by hand, you have to draw your neighborhood with as many landmarks as you can think of. So I sat down at my little table in my room, drinking a cup of coffee and feeling remarkably silly. I drew a grid of all the streets around my guest house that I could remember, and wrote in all the landmarks I could remember. The police station is here, this temple is there, there is the borderline restaurant is here, all these different things. And feeling very foolish, I drew the best map that I could. Actually, I'll insert a copy of my map, what I came up with right now. Here it is. So there's my map that I handed in to immigration. Seemed to satisfy them. Uh-oh, barking dog. But I did run into the same copy problem as before, that when I went back to immigration, of course, they don't want the original. They need 2 photocopies of that map. You keep the original, then they stamp it, then you have to write your name and sign it. And after you do that, they give you another form that says that you showed them the original map, and then you have to fill that out and sign that as well. So it's a little bit of a complicated process. So once I had my map, I had the receipt, I had to go back to the photocopy place to make, copies of my map and copies of the receipt. But as I'm leaving the guest house, I run into the owner of my guest house, and she has pulled her car into the driveway. And apparently she felt so bad that I had to go all the way out to immigration and then come all the way back again, because she asked me, how did you get there? And I said, well, I went by taxi. And she asked, how much was the taxi? I told her 100 baht. And she said, how did you come back? Did you walk? Because she knows I walk everywhere. And I said, no, this time I didn't walk. I took a motorcycle taxi back, and it cost another 100 baht. And she was very upset that I had to spend all this money just to come back to get the receipt. And she insisted on driving me to immigration. And though I appreciated the thought, I really didn't want her to do that. For one thing, I still had to go to the print shop, print out more copies of my COVID-19 embassy letter. I had to make photocopies of all my receipt and my maps and all this kind of thing. And if she drove me, she would probably try to drive me to this shop. She wouldn't be able to park anywhere. We drive around in circles trying to find parking. It would just end up being a giant problem. And she seems to have a lot of trouble with little practical details of life. So I imagined her and I in a car showing up at that military checkpoint. The taxi driver, he breezed through that checkpoint just by saying, yeah, I got a white dude in the back and he's going to immigration, and we go through. But I could easily see the owner of my guest house rolling down her window, talking to the soldier, and through some weird thing she says, getting both of us arrested or barred from continuing or in trouble of some kind. So I really didn't want to have her drive me anywhere. And even if she drove me to immigration, she'd probably want to come inside immigration with me and start talking to the immigration clerks. And who knew what would happen if that occurred? And I didn't want her anywhere near immigration. I didn't want her to drive me anywhere at all. But she felt so bad, she was insisting on this. She physically blocked my way and did not want me to leave on foot, without getting in the car. But I stuck to my guns and said, no, it is absolutely fine. I have to go to the print office first. It's going to take a long time. I will be at immigration for a long time. I don't know how long it will take. Taking a taxi again is easy. It's no problem. You know, you don't have to take me. And, you know, we went through this long back and forth of social niceties until she finally relented and allowed me to leave, you know. But again, she did feel so bad that she really wanted to drive me there this time. So, called the taxi company again. Oh, actually, I didn't call the taxi company because my phone still wouldn't work. I had to get the guys at the first hotel to call them, and the taxi came and got me, and off we went to immigration one more time. So, another taxi ride back to immigration. I'm there. I've got stacks and stacks of all of my paperwork. I waited in line, got called up to the window again at the main counter, and I stood there for a long time, filling out form after form after form, my TM7 in duplicate, all the other forms I mentioned, then all the signatures on all those papers, then all the documents signifying that I had given them these documents and shown them the originals. And then I sat down and watched the clerks at work. Thank goodness they know their job, because they had a lot of stamping and restamping and clipping and gluing and attaching and computer forms to deal with. Very complex procedure, apparently. And at one point they called me to the front again, and I had to stand there, remove my mask, and they aimed the computer camera, the webcam, at me and took a full body shot. Like, it wasn't a face picture, it was like head to toe picture of me, and I guess that gets attached to my file as well, along with my map to my guest house. Hey, buddy. Oh, there. He's very curious. No tail wagging though. I kept waiting for that tail to wag, but he was just stone cold, that puppy. But he did not try to bite me, so I appreciate that. And at long last, the final stamping took place, and I was called back to the window, and they handed me my passport with not, and this is really quite something, even after all of that, after what felt like days and days of work, I did not get a 30-day visa extension. Technically, I didn't. What they put in my passport was a stamp that is what they call under consideration, which means that my application has been received and is under consideration, and now I have to go back in 2 weeks, on September 30th exactly, and at that time, if my application has been approved, they will put the 30-day extension stamp in my passport. So again, that strikes me as kind of weird. You're applying for 30 days, and they take 15 days essentially to decide whether to give it to you or not. And then you have to go back again and then get the actual stamp, and then there's only 15 days left in your extension anyway. But yeah, apparently from what I've heard, 99.9% of everyone who gets an under consideration stamp actually ends up getting the extension. So that's a very low risk thing. It's just the way they do things. So I'm gonna have to go back to immigration on September 30th and give them my passport again, and then they will stamp it with the actual extension stamp. And that is the end of my very long story. Good timing on the end, because I just got back to the main road. And the Braverly Cafe is just a short distance in this direction. So I think I'm gonna go there, sweaty as I am, to have a iced coffee of some kind and relax there for a little while. So, yeah, that's my story. And as I said, I wasn't gonna tell this story because it's really just a boring story, isn't it? But at the same time, it struck me when it was all done how hard I had worked, like how many days of effort went into getting permission to be somewhere for 30 days. And I'm not even done. I still have to go back to immigration again. And when you think about that, it really feels a bit out of balance. And that made me think of a movie called Koyaanisqatsi. This movie, I saw it in theaters long after it was initially released, but I remember going to like a midnight screening of this movie called Koyaanisqatsi that I really knew nothing about. And the tagline for Koyaanisqatsi is "Life Out of Balance." That's the tagline for it. And it shows modern society sped up really fast, how busy we all were, you know, in highways and subway systems, all and factory assembly lines, and maybe life is a little bit out of balance. And after my experience getting this 30-day visa extension, it struck me that maybe my life is also a little bit out of balance. That's a lot of work just to be somewhere for 30 days. But the good news is that I got the extension, at least I'm pretty sure I got the extension, and I don't have to rush to leave Thailand anymore. And my extension should take me up until October 26th or October 25th, something like that. I won't know for sure until I get my passport back from them. So that's the end of my story. My struggles with bureaucracy. My version of the movie Brazil as well, I guess. Or Kafka's The Castle. The end of my story. And I will see you in the next video.